Welcome to the channel. It's Dr. Durst. Today, I want to share with you some facts about visceral fat. So if you haven't heard that term before, then you definitely want to stick around for all the details about visceral fat. But before I do that, I would love for you to like and subscribe to the channel so that you get notifications about videos that might come out, and it helps us get the channel out there. So back to the visceral fat. Let's dive into it. So what is it? I hear this a lot in the office that people are coming in because they're seeing stuff on social media about visceral fat. Well, visceral just literally means around the internal organs or your internal organs. So visceral fat is fat that is deeper inside the abdomen around your internal organs. And we are talking about more an abdominal cavity and the organs in your abdominal cavity. So what's in there? The liver, the pancreas, all the small intestines, large intestines. So there's lots of organs in there. And basically you have fatty tissue on the outside of that. So it isn't something that you can see. That's the subcutaneous fat. Visceral fat isn't something we can see, but it's actually more dangerous because it can be inflammatory and metabolically active. So not only are certain diseases more likely to lead to visceral fat, but visceral fat likewise can also lead to an increased risk of certain diseases. And we'll talk about that. But when you see somebody, frequently, you almost have to say, am I healthy? Do I feel healthy? Am I internally healthy? Because if you're doing the right things and you feel healthy, then overall your body probably is adapting and responding the right way. But if you feel like maybe I'm not overweight, but I don't feel, look, or perceive myself as being super healthy based on whatever it is, lifestyle habits you're doing, things you may or may not be doing right. We'll talk about what you can do to improve that. But overall, you could still be skinny and you can still be very metabolically unhealthy and have lots of visceral fat. So it's something that they call TOFI, or thin on the outside, but fat on the inside. I like to term it skinny fat. So I have patients come to us that want peptides. We don't do weight loss programs, but if they want to be on peptides for body composition changes or some weight loss, my point is if they already look thin and I'm looking at them and they're thin, they definitely do not need peptides for weight loss. And I just tell them, do you really want to be skinny fat so that you actually look skinny to other people but are very metabolically unhealthy? So what is visceral fat? So I will just say that men are more likely to have it than women, and women, or at least before the age of 50. And then after the age of 50, women are more likely to have it because of drop in estrogen with menopause. So if women tend to have fat in other areas and suddenly it's an abdominal fat, it is because they're more likely after the drop of estrogen and the entry into menopause to have some increased accumulation of visceral fat. For men, it's under the age of 50 because with that, they'll have a testosterone drop and they have cortisol that spikes. And so those will cause visceral changes and fat accumulation under the age of 50. So then it could be more likely for sure. So basically there's certain diseases. So if you already have a metabolically unhealthy diagnosis, such as diabetes, insulin resistance, all of that, that can actually lead to some increased visceral fat. You have inactivity, you're not sleeping well, your diet is filled with processed foods and unhealthy foods, then you're already likely to have an increase, at least risk of visceral fat. But also if you have an increased visceral, or more likely and more at risk for having heart disease, high blood pressure, insulin resistance, diabetes. And so those are all, even certain cancers, sexual dysfunction, hormonal dysfunction, all of that. So the things that we want to do to make sure that we don't get visceral fat or that we get rid of it, because it can be fixed, is that you want to, number one, work on your lifestyle habits. So you want to be more active. And when you're perimenopause and menopause, you want to add some resistance. In andropause, you want to add some resistance training in there, but you also want to be active. One of those ways to lose additional fat with increased activity is just adding 10,000 steps a day to your activity. And The reason why we say that is 10,000 steps a day are approximately 500 calories. And if it takes 3,500 calories to lose 1 pound of fat, then if you did that for 7 days, you would have 1 pound of fat a week. That's a low intensity exercise. So when you do a low intensity exercise and you don't eat or you fast prior to a low intensity exercise, not a high intensity, not something that's going to stress the body, but a low intensity, then you can actually work off that fat. So 10,000 steps a day, maybe fasted, help just work on the fat part. And just think, when you're decreasing the fat part externally, you're going to start decreasing that internal, especially if you know you're doing the right things. I just say, if you're active and then next is dietary type stuff, and you feel like you're making the right choices and you've changed and now you're making the right choices, then you're already on your way to decreasing visceral fat if it's there. So processed carbs, stay on the perimeter of the store. So when you go to the grocery store, make sure you're on the perimeter of the store with the unprocessed foods. So lots of carbs or processed foods or carbs are an issue. Chronic stress can be an issue. Inactivity, obviously, poor sleep. Those are all things that you want to try and work on. And so sleep is a whole nother topic, but you want to get at least 7 or 8 hours of good sleep. And so hormone optimization is another thing that you can do, because as hormones decline in the body, inflammation increases, and so does your risk of all the diseases. So cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, insulin resistance, diabetes. So if you're at that age of perimenopause and menopause or andropause, a man that's entering the same version, but for men, then you want to think about hormone optimization, stress management, meditation, and then also there's some peptide therapies that we can do to sometimes help you metabolize faster and get rid of some of the fat, both externally and internally. So those are some key facts on visceral fat. In my opinion, those are things that we talk about on a daily basis. So if you have other questions about this, or you have heard something else that maybe is still perplexing to you, please drop it in the comments below. Like, subscribe, share with friends, and then let me know. Is there anything else you want to talk about? Because I am willing to deep dive into anything wellness or sexual wellness.